The streets of New York were alive with the usual chaos of a Thursday evening. Cars honked impatiently, headlights blurred in the mist, and the sidewalks bustled with umbrellas jostling for space. The rain came down harder than predicted, washing the streets in silver reflections of neon lights and traffic signals. Sophia Bennett tightened her thrift store jacket around herself, shivering as droplets of water slipped down her neck. She quickened her steps, hugging her worn canvas bag closer to her side. The night had been long already. Her shift at the bookstore had stretched overtime, and now she was late for her second job at a small café in Midtown. Her sneakers squelched with every hurried step, reminding her that she couldn't afford a new pair just yet. Rent was due in less than a week. Tuition fees for her next semester loomed above her like a shadow she couldn't escape. But still, she carried herself with quiet determination, the same kind that had kept her going all her life as an orphan who had aged out of the foster system. Sophia's life had been stitched together with struggle, but she carried her burdens with a soft smile. She had grown used to being invisible in a city that never paused for anyone, and in a way, she preferred it that way. But tonight, fate had other plans. As she turned onto Lexington Avenue, she noticed a sleek black car pulled awkwardly to the curb. Its hazard lights blinked steadily in the rain, cutting through the darkness. Standing beside it, sheltered only by the inadequate cover of the street lamp, was a man in a charcoal gray suit, his tie slightly loosened, his expression dark with frustration. He looked completely out of place in the rain-soaked street, like a figure pulled from the glossy pages of a magazine and dropped carelessly into the grit of real life. Sophia slowed her steps instinctively. She didn't need to get involved. She was already late. And yet, the man crouched, examining the wheel with a mix of annoyance and disbelief. The front tire was unmistakably flat, and from the way he poked at it, it was clear he had no idea how to fix it. His phone was pressed to his ear, but judging from his clenched jaw, whoever he was calling wasn't picking up. Sophia hesitated, biting her lip. She could easily walk past. But something tugged at her, an old habit of kindness, the same one that had led her to volunteer at shelters even when she had nothing left for herself. Taking a breath, she stepped closer. Excuse me," she called out, raising her voice over the rain. The man straightened abruptly, his eyes sharp as they landed on her. They were striking, icy blue, intense in a way that made her momentarily forget the cold seeping into her bones. His gaze swept over her quickly, as though assessing whether she was a threat. "Yes." His voice was deep, authoritative, laced with impatience. Sophia tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear nervously. "Your tire, it's flat. Do you need help?" His brows drew together. For a moment, it looked as if he was about to dismiss her. His suit alone probably cost more than she earned in 2 months. He was the kind of man who didn't accept help from strangers on the street. But then his shoulders loosened ever so slightly. "I called roadside assistance. They said an hour." "I don't have an hour." Sophia glanced at the wheel. "I could fix it for you, if you've got a spare in the trunk." The man blinked, clearly caught off guard. "You?" She bristled slightly at his tone. "Yes, me." "It's not rocket science. I've changed more than a few tires before." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the drumming of rain on asphalt. Finally, he gave a small, almost reluctant nod. "Fine. If you're sure." "Pop the trunk," she said simply, setting her bag on the curb. He did as instructed, still watching her with that sharp, assessing gaze. Sophia ignored it, rolling up her sleeves as she retrieved the spare tire and the jack. Her fingers were already numb from the cold, but her movements were steady, practiced. She crouched beside the car, the rain soaking through her jeans, and got to work. The man stood nearby, his expensive shoes splashing in shallow puddles. He looked restless, like someone unused to standing idle while another took control. "I could help maybe," he offered awkwardly. She shook her head. "Better let me handle it. You'll ruin that suit." For the first time, his lips twitched as though fighting a smile. "Fair point." Sophia worked quickly, loosening the lug nuts and fitting the jack into place. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her hands streaked with grease and rain. But she didn't complain, not once. By the time she tightened the last nut on the spare, her knees were soaked, her arms sore, but the job was done. She stood, wiping her hands on her jeans, and gave him a small nod. There. You're good to go. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time then. His gaze softened, losing some of that cold sharpness. You did that faster than most mechanics. Sophia shrugged lightly. When you've had to fix things yourself your whole life, you learn. Something flickered in his eyes at her words, but he didn't comment. Instead, he reached into his wallet, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. Here. For your trouble. Sophia froze, then shook her head quickly. No. I don't want your money. His brows lifted, clearly not expecting refusal. It's the least I can do. You just saved me time I didn't have. I didn't help you for money, she said firmly, though her voice remained gentle. Keep it. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the billionaire in his immaculate suit, the orphan girl in her soaked thrift store jacket. The rain poured around them, blurring the world into a curtain of silver, but neither moved. Finally, he slid the bill back into his wallet, a strange expression crossing his face. Almost respect. What's your name? Sophia. Sophia Bennett. He gave a slow nod, as though committing it to memory. Alexander Reed. The name rang faintly familiar, though Sophia couldn't place it. She simply nodded politely, gathering her bag from the curb. Well, good luck, Mr. Reed. I should get going. As she turned to leave, Alexander found himself saying, Wait. She glanced back. He hesitated, unused to this kind of vulnerability. Thank you, Sophia. Not many people would have stopped. Sophia offered a small smile, one that reached her eyes despite her exhaustion. Everyone needs a little kindness sometimes. And with that, she disappeared into the rain-soaked crowd, leaving Alexander Reed, CEO of Reed Enterprises, billionaire, and one of the most powerful men in the city, standing by his car, oddly unsettled. 4 years, people had wanted things from him. His money, his influence, his name. But this girl, soaked to the bone with grease on her hands, had walked away without asking for a single thing. It was the first time in a long time that Alexander felt curious. And he had a feeling this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed. The little bell above the cafe door jingled softly as Alexander Reed stepped inside, brushing droplets of rain from his tailored overcoat. The warmth of the room contrasted sharply with the brisk autumn chill outside, filling the air with the aroma of freshly ground coffee beans and the faint sweetness of pastries just pulled from the oven. It was not the kind of place Alexander usually visited. His world was one of rooftop cocktail parties, exclusive restaurants with waitlists that stretched months, and meetings held in glass towers above the skyline. The cafe on East 47th Street was modest, with worn wooden floors and mismatched chairs. Handwritten chalkboard menus hung above the counter, and indie music hummed from a small speaker in the corner. But Alexander wasn't here for the coffee. He was here for her. His eyes scanned the room quickly, sharp as always. And there she was, Sophia Bennett, moving gracefully between tables in her simple uniform, balancing a tray of steaming mugs with practiced ease. Her brown hair was pulled into a neat ponytail, and a strand had slipped loose to brush against her cheek as she bent to refill a customer's cup. She smiled at an elderly man in the corner, laughed at something another patron said, and in that moment, Alexander realized something unusual. This woman was genuinely kind to people without expecting anything back. It unsettled him more than he cared to admit. As he approached the counter, Sophia looked up and froze. Her breath hitched slightly before she masked it with professional composure. You, she said, her tone cautious. Me, Alexander replied evenly, his lips curving just enough to resemble the hint of a smile. Sophia glanced around, as though hoping someone else would swoop in and rescue her from the unexpected encounter. What are you doing here? Ordering coffee, I think, he said smoothly, glancing at the menu. Though I'll admit, I'm not entirely sure what half of these drinks are. Sophia narrowed her eyes. You don't seem like the latte with caramel drizzle type. He tilted his head, amused. And what type do I seem like? Black. Straight. No nonsense, she replied without hesitation. Alexander chuckled softly, a sound that surprised even him. Accurate. He ordered as predicted, black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and watched as Sophia prepared it. Her movements were efficient but carried a natural grace, the kind that comes from repetition born of necessity, not choice. She handed him the cup carefully, avoiding brushing his hand with hers. "On the house," she said simply. His brows lifted. "Why?" "Because you look like the kind of man who wouldn't accept it if I said no tip," she answered, her eyes steady on his. Alexander studied her for a long moment, and then placed a crisp $20 bill on the counter anyway. "Consider it an investment. I'd like you to remember me." "I was planning to forget," Sophia muttered under her breath, but he heard it. He didn't leave. Instead, he moved to sit at a small corner table where he had a clear view of her behind the counter. He opened his phone, scrolled through emails, and yet his eyes returned to her again and again. Sophia tried to focus on her work, but she could feel his presence like a magnetic pull. Each time she glanced up, she found him watching her, calm, unreadable, but with that same sharp intensity she'd seen on the rainy street. Finally, during a lull in customers, she approached his table reluctantly. "Why are you here, really?" Alexander set his phone aside, folding his hands neatly. "Because I wanted to see you again." Sophia's stomach flipped, though she masked it with a frown. "People don't just want to see me. I'm nobody." "You're not nobody," Alexander said firmly, his voice carrying an edge of conviction. "You're the woman who changed my tire in the rain when you had nothing to gain. That doesn't happen often in my world." Sophia blinked, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. For a moment, she almost believed him. But she shook her head, reminding herself who she was, an orphan scraping by, one paycheck from disaster. And him? Everything about him screamed wealth and influence. He was from a universe she didn't belong to. "Well, Mr. Reed, I'm glad your car is working. But you don't need to keep following me around just because of that." "Alexander," he corrected smoothly. "Call me Alexander." "Fine. Alexander." She crossed her arms. "What exactly do you want from me?" His gaze lingered on her face, studying her as though she were a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Finally, he answered, "A conversation." Her eyes widened slightly. That was it. No flashy promises, no arrogant declarations, just a conversation. Sophia sighed, sliding into the chair across from him reluctantly. 5 minutes. I'm on the clock. Alexander's lips twitched again, almost a smile. Fair enough. They sat in silence for a beat, the hum of the café filling the space between them. Sophia waited, arms crossed, expecting him to dazzle her with the same charm he probably used on investors and board members. But instead, he asked something unexpected. "Where did you learn to change a tire like that?" Sophia blinked. "That's your question?" He nodded. She shrugged. "When you grow up bouncing from one foster home to another, you figure things out. I couldn't call anyone when things went wrong, so I learned how to handle it myself." Alexander's eyes darkened, but not with pity, with respect. "That explains the confidence." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Confidence?" "I was soaked, freezing, and covered in grease. Not exactly glamorous." "Strength is rarely glamorous," Alexander replied quietly. The way he said it made Sophia pause. For a moment, she glimpsed something behind his polished exterior, a shadow he didn't usually let others see. But before she could ask, her manager called her name, breaking the moment. She stood quickly, smoothing her apron. "Back to work. Your 5 minutes are up." Alexander leaned back in his chair, watching her retreat. His coffee sat untouched, forgotten. A rare thing happened in that moment. Alexander Reed, the man who always had the next deal planned, the next move calculated, realized he was genuinely curious about someone. And he wasn't about to let that curiosity fade. Sophia tried to shake off the encounter for the rest of the shift, but her mind betrayed her. Why had he come back? Why her, of all people? She had met plenty of customers in her years of working, but none returned with that kind of persistence. By closing time, she convinced herself it was just coincidence. Maybe he had business nearby. Maybe he'd never show up again. But deep down, a small, traitorous part of her hoped he would. Alexander walked out of the cafe into the cool night air, his driver waiting with the black sedan at the curb. He slid into the back seat, loosening his tie. "Home, sir?" the driver asked. Alexander stared out the window at the warm glow of the cafe fading into the distance. "Not yet. I'll tell you where to go." For the first time in years, his agenda was not dictated by business. Tonight, it was dictated by curiosity, and by the stubborn memory of a girl who refused to take his money, who looked him straight in the eye and saw not a CEO, but just a man stranded in the rain. And Alexander Reed, the man who had everything, suddenly wanted more than he could explain. The weekend crowds filled the cafe with chatter and the constant hiss of the espresso machine. Sophia moved swiftly between tables, her apron tied neatly, her ponytail bouncing as she poured coffee and took orders. She had grown accustomed to hard work, it was part of who she was, but today her rhythm faltered more than once. Because Alexander Reed was sitting at his usual corner table. It had been 3 weeks since that rainy night when she'd helped him with a flat tire, and somehow he had appeared at the cafe almost every other day since then. At first, she thought it was coincidence. But coincidence didn't look like a billionaire in a perfectly tailored suit making time in his schedule just to sit in a modest cafe, sipping black coffee he barely touched, and watching her with quiet intensity. Sophia had tried to ignore him. She told herself not to get curious. She told herself not to let her heart skip each time he caught her eye. But the truth was, his presence unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. "Refill?" she asked briskly as she reached his table. Alexander looked up from his phone, his expression softening slightly. "Please." She poured coffee into his cup, trying not to notice how close his hand was to hers, how the faintest brush of his sleeve sent a ripple through her stomach. When she straightened, he asked, "How many shifts do you usually work in a week?" "Too many," she said dryly, moving to walk away. But his voice followed her. "You never take a break? Do something for yourself." Sophia turned, exasperated. "Mr. Reed." "Alexander," he corrected with quiet firmness. She exhaled, lowering her voice. "Alexander, not all of us have the luxury of free time. I work because if I don't eat. That's reality." His eyes held hers, and for once he didn't have a reply. There was no quick retort, no effortless charm. Just silence, and something that almost looked like guilt. Sophia didn't wait for him to answer. She walked away, forcing herself to focus on her other tables. But her chest ached with the weight of the truth she lived every day. She was surviving, not living. And a man like Alexander Reed, with his immaculate suits and expensive watch, couldn't possibly understand. That evening, after her shift ended, Sophia walked home with sore feet and a heavy bag. She passed a newsstand on the corner, glancing absently at the magazines displayed. Her eyes caught on the glossy cover of Business Elite Weekly. Her breath hitched. There, staring back at her from the cover, was Alexander. Alexander Reed, America's youngest visionary CEO. The billionaire behind Reed Enterprises. Sophia froze in place. The magazine headline screamed wealth and power, accompanied by a photo of him in a sleek tuxedo at some high-profile gala. She grabbed the magazine with trembling hands, flipping through the article. Words blurred in front of her eyes. Self-made fortune. One of the youngest billionaires in the United States. Known for his sharp business instincts. Elusive in his private life. Her heart pounded in her ears. Alexander Reed. Not just some stranger she'd helped in the rain. Not just a man who'd come into her cafe with curious persistence. He was that Alexander Reed. The pieces fell into place. His expensive suits, his confidence, the way he carried himself like the world bent to his will. She had been naive not to notice. But more than shock, what she felt was betrayal. He had let her believe he was just another man. He had sat at her table, spoken to her like an equal, all while hiding the truth. And worst of all, he hadn't told her. When she arrived at work the next morning, Alexander was already there, sitting at his usual spot with his untouched coffee. Sophia stormed over, her fists clenched. "You lied to me." He looked up calmly, as though he'd been expecting this. "I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you." Her voice rose, drawing glances from other patrons. "You let me think you were some ordinary guy, when you're actually—" She pulled the folded magazine from her bag and slapped it on the table. "This." The glossy cover stared up at them both. Alexander's jaw tightened. "I wanted you to see me without all of that. Just as a man stranded in the rain. Not as a headline." Sophia's chest heaved. "Do you have any idea what it feels like, to spend weeks talking to someone and then realize they've been hiding the biggest truth about themselves?" His eyes darkened, but his voice remained steady. "I didn't want the money to get in the way. Everyone I meet knows who I am before I speak a word. They all want something. You didn't. That's why I didn't tell you." Sophia's throat tightened. Part of her wanted to believe him, but another part screamed that this was dangerous. Men like him lived in a world far beyond hers. "Maybe you didn't mean to lie," she said softly, her voice cracking, "but it still feels like one." For the first time, Alexander's composure slipped. He leaned forward, his tone urgent. "Sophia, you have to believe me. I don't care what the magazines say. I don't care what the board thinks. I keep coming here because of you. Because you're the only person who's looked at me and seen me." Her eyes stung with unexpected tears. She shook her head. "I can't do this. I'm not like you. I'll never fit in your world." She turned to walk away, but Alexander stood quickly. "Then let me fit into yours." The words hung in the air, sharp and raw. Sophia stopped, her back still to him. Her heart pounded at the sincerity in his voice, but fear outweighed it. She forced herself to keep walking, even as his voice followed her. "I'm not giving up on you, Sophia." Understand. That night, Sophia sat alone in her tiny apartment, the sound of rain tapping against her window. The magazine lay on her table, Alexander's face staring up at her, confident and untouchable. She buried her head in her hands. She had lived her whole life being unseen, unnoticed, discarded by foster families who never kept her. And now the most powerful man she had ever met wanted to be part of her life. But could she trust it? Could she trust him? Her heart whispered yes. Her mind screamed no. And somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that overlooked the glittering skyline, Alexander Reed stood at his window, glass of scotch in hand, thinking of the girl who had walked away. For the first time in years, a business deal wasn't the only thing slipping through his grasp. The Monday board meeting at Reed Enterprises stretched into its third hour, but Alexander Reed wasn't listening. The voices around the table blended into a dull hum, financial figures and quarterly projections barely registering in his mind. Instead, his thoughts wandered back to a small café with mismatched furniture, and to a girl whose eyes had burned with both disappointment and defiance the last time she spoke to him. "Mr. Reed." The sharp voice of Vanessa Cole cut through the fog of his thoughts. Alexander blinked, focusing on the elegantly dressed woman across the table. Vanessa was everything people expected of high society. Tall, poised, flawless in her designer suit, her confidence filling the room as naturally as her perfume. She had been an investor and advisor for Reed Enterprises for nearly 2 years, and everyone knew she had ambitions beyond business. Alexander knew too. "Yes, Miss Cole," he replied smoothly, masking his distraction. She tilted her head, her crimson lips curving. "I asked if you'd reviewed the new partnership proposal with Hale Industries. Or were you preoccupied?" The subtle mocking lilt in her voice didn't escape him, nor did the gleam in her eyes, the kind that told him she saw more than he wanted her to. Alexander straightened, his composure returning instantly. "I've reviewed it. My decision stands. We'll proceed cautiously. I don't rush into commitments I can't stand by." Vanessa's smile widened ever so slightly. "Of course not." But when the meeting finally adjourned and the board members filed out, Vanessa lingered. She crossed the room gracefully, stopping near Alexander's chair. "You've been different lately," she said softly, her voice laced with calculated curiosity. "Distracted." almost as if something outside this building has captured your attention. Alexander met her gaze coolly. My personal life is not up for discussion. Vanessa leaned closer, lowering her voice. You should be careful, Alexander. Men like you can't afford distractions, especially ones from questionable backgrounds. His jaw tightened. What do you mean? She gave a light, dismissive laugh, as though she hadn't just thrown down a gauntlet. Word travels quickly in this city. People talk. They say you've been spending time in some rundown café with a waitress who has no family, no pedigree, nothing to offer you but trouble. Sophia. The name screamed inside his chest, but Alexander didn't flinch. He simply fixed Vanessa with a cold stare. You do well to keep your gossip to yourself, Ms. Cole. But Vanessa wasn't deterred. She leaned back slightly, studying him like a predator who just caught the scent of prey. I only want what's best for you, Alexander. Men in your position don't risk everything for a charity case. With that, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a drumbeat of warning. Sophia felt the sting of whispers long before she knew where they came from. At the cafe, her co-workers had begun exchanging glances when Alexander arrived. Customers lingered longer at the counter, whispering behind their hands. Even her manager, who had once praised her reliability, now eyed her with thinly veiled suspicion. One afternoon, as she wiped down tables after a particularly busy lunch rush, she overheard two girls by the counter giggling. Can you believe it? That billionaire, Alexander Reed, hanging around her of all people. One whispered loudly enough for Sophia to hear. Maybe she's got something on him, the other snickered. Or maybe he's just bored, slumming it with a waitress until he finds someone more appropriate. Sophia froze, the rag in her hand clutched tightly. Heat burned behind her eyes, but she forced herself to stay calm, to keep her back turned. But the words burrowed deep. That evening, when Alexander appeared as he always did, Sophia found herself snapping more sharply than usual. You shouldn't keep coming here, she muttered as she placed his coffee on the table. He frowned. Why not? Because people talk, she said quietly, unable to meet his gaze. They're saying things about me. About us. Alexander leaned forward, his voice firm. Let them talk. None of it matters. Her chest tightened. It matters to me. I've lived my whole life being looked down on. Being told I'll never be good enough. I can't go through that again, Alexander. He softened at the vulnerability in her voice. Sophia, he hesitated, then reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. You are good enough. More than enough. I don't care what anyone else says. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at Sophia's heart. She wanted to believe him, desperately. Yet the echo of those cruel whispers lingered, feeding her deepest fear, that she was just a passing curiosity in his world. Days later, Vanessa Cole made her move. Sophia had just finished her shift when a sleek black car pulled up outside the cafe. The tinted window lowered, revealing Vanessa, her perfect smile gleaming like a blade. Miss Bennett. Vanessa's tone was smooth, deceptively polite. May I have a word? Sophia hesitated, every instinct screaming to walk away. But curiosity, or perhaps naivety, won. She stepped closer. Vanessa's eyes swept over her plainly dressed figure with thinly veiled disdain. I thought it best to warn you. You see, Alexander is a very important man. He can't afford to associate with people who might tarnish his reputation. Sophia's throat tightened. If you're implying that's me. I'm not implying, Vanessa cut in, her smile sharp. I'm telling you, you're not part of his world. And sooner or later, he'll realize it. Sophia's fists clenched at her sides. You don't know me. Vanessa's laugh was soft and cruel. I know enough. An orphan with no background, scraping by on tips? That's not the woman a man like Alexander Reed ends up with. That's the woman he plays with until something better comes along. The words sliced through Sophia like glass. She turned away, her chest aching, but Vanessa called after her. "Do yourself a favor, Miss Bennett. Walk away before he does. Save yourself the heartbreak." That night, Sophia sat on her bed in her tiny apartment, her uniform still clinging to her from the long shift. Vanessa's words echoed in her mind, twisting with the whispers she'd overheard at the café. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was fooling herself to think someone like Alexander could ever truly see her as an equal. She thought of his eyes, steady and sincere when he told her she was enough. She wanted to believe him. But the shadows of doubt grew louder, drowning out his voice. And across the city, Alexander stood in his penthouse, staring out at the glittering skyline, unaware of the storm brewing in Sophia's heart. Rain pattered against the windows of Reed Enterprises, blurring the view of the city beyond. Inside his office, Alexander Reed was restless. He had spent the entire day trying, and failing, to focus on work. The words from Sophia's lips a few nights ago still echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't keep coming here. People talk." He clenched his jaw, frustration burning in his chest. Why couldn't she see? Why couldn't she believe that none of those whispers mattered to him? His phone buzzed. A message. He reached for it instantly, hoping, foolishly, that it might be her. But it wasn't. The text was from Vanessa Cole. "We need to talk. It concerns Sophia Bennett." Alexander's brow furrowed. Anger simmered beneath his skin, but curiosity forced his hand. Minutes later, he found himself striding into a private lounge where Vanessa was waiting, poised with a glass of wine. "Alexander," she purred, rising to greet him. "I knew you'd come." "Make it quick," he snapped, his patience thin. "If this is more of your gossip." Vanessa's smile was infuriatingly calm. Not gossip. Proof. From her designer handbag, she produced a manila envelope. She slid it across the polished table, her eyes glittering with triumph. Alexander stared at it but didn't move. "What's this supposed to be?" "Go on. Look." Reluctantly, he opened the envelope. Inside were photographs, grainy, taken from a distance. Sophia leaving the cafe late at night. Sophia talking with a man outside her apartment. Sophia accepting an envelope from him, her face unreadable. Vanessa leaned closer, her voice a silken whisper. "She's not what you think, Alexander. That man, he's a known gambler. In debt. Word is, he's been using her to funnel money. And that envelope." She let out a soft, pitying laugh. "Looks like your sweet Sophia isn't as innocent as she seems." Alexander's grip on the photos tightened. He knew Sophia. He trusted her. And yet, doubt, sharp and unwelcome, pricked his chest. "She wouldn't," he began, but Vanessa cut him off. "You don't survive in this world by being naive. Trust me, darling, I've seen girls like her before. They're drawn to men like you. Power, wealth, it's a magnet. You're just another stepping stone for her." Her words slithered through him, feeding the very insecurities Sophia had confessed. For the first time since he met her, Alexander felt the faintest crack in his certainty. He stood abruptly, his voice clipped. "I don't believe you." Vanessa smiled knowingly. "You don't have to. Time will prove me right." Meanwhile, Sophia was fighting her own storm. The photographs had been staged, but she didn't know that. The man in them, Eric, an old acquaintance from the neighborhood, had stopped her outside her apartment a few nights ago, begging for help. He owed money, and she'd lent him what little she could spare. It was nothing more than a desperate act of kindness. But Vanessa had made sure Sophia knew those pictures existed. "You see." Vanessa's voice still echoed in her ears from that night outside the cafe. "Alexander will see these and wonder. He'll question your motives. And once doubt creeps in, it never leaves." Sophia had gone home shaking, her chest tight with panic. She hadn't told Alexander. She couldn't. If he saw the photos, what would he think? Maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe it was better to end it before he did. Two nights later, Alexander arrived at the cafe as usual. But this time, Sophia didn't greet him with her hesitant smile. She stood stiffly behind the counter, her uniform neat, her face pale. When she finally approached his table, her voice was cold, rehearsed. "We can't do this anymore." Alexander blinked, stunned. "What? You shouldn't come here. You shouldn't talk to me. Whatever this friendship is, it has to stop." His chest tightened. "Sophia, no. Don't say that." She forced herself to meet his gaze, even as her heart cracked. "You don't belong here, Alexander. And I don't belong in your world. People are talking. They're saying things about me, about us. And maybe they're right." "They're not," he said fiercely, his hand reaching for hers across the table. "You are good enough. I don't care about their whispers." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she pulled her hand back quickly. "I care." "Is this about Vanessa?" he demanded, his voice low with frustration. "Did she say something to you?" Sophia flinched at the name but shook her head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is reality. You'll get tired of defending me, Alexander. One day, you'll realize she was right, that I'm nothing but a burden." "That's not true," he snapped, but his desperation only seemed to make her retreat further. Sophia took a shaky breath. "Please, just let me go." Alexander's jaw clenched, his chest burning with a fury he couldn't direct anywhere. He wanted to shake her, to demand the truth, to tell her she was wrong. But the anguish in her eyes stopped him cold. She was already halfway gone. Slowly, painfully, he rose from his seat. His eyes never left hers, even as he forced the words past his throat. "If that's what you really want." Sophia bit her lip until she tasted blood, her body trembling. But she nodded. "It is a lie." The hardest one she'd ever told. Without another word, Alexander turned and walked out of the cafe, his shoulders rigid, his heart heavier than it had ever been. And the moment the door closed behind him, Sophia's tears finally fell. In the days that followed, silence stretched between them like a chasm. Alexander threw himself into work with brutal intensity, his presence at the office colder, sharper than ever before. But at night, when the city quieted, he found himself staring at his phone, fighting the urge to call her, to demand answers, to beg her to come back. Sophia, meanwhile, buried herself in long shifts, avoiding his gaze whenever he passed the cafe, though he rarely did anymore. Each night, she lay awake in her small apartment, the ache of loss suffocating her. She told herself she was protecting him, that letting him go was the only way to keep him safe from the ruin Vanessa had promised. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wasn't protecting him. She was protecting herself from the heartbreak of watching him realize she was never enough. Across the city, Vanessa Cole sipped champagne in her penthouse suite, watching the rain wash over the glass. She smiled, satisfied. The first crack had appeared. And soon, the whole foundation would crumble. The city was alive that Friday night, neon lights casting their glow across the wet asphalt. But Alexander Reed felt nothing but a hollow ache in his chest. It had been a week since Sophia ended things. A week of silence, of unanswered messages, of nights spent staring at his ceiling while his mind replayed every word she said. "Please, just let me go." His jaw tightened at the memory. He had respected her request, but it gnawed at him every second of the day. Something didn't add up. That wasn't Sophia. That wasn't the woman who looked at him with soft eyes, who defended him in whispers when she thought he wasn't listening. No. She had been forced into this, and he had a very good idea of who was behind it. At the same time, across the city, Sophia walked home from her late shift, her steps heavy, her heart even heavier. The cafe lights had gone out hours ago, but she'd stayed behind scrubbing tables and cleaning until her manager practically pushed her out the door. Anything to keep herself busy. Anything to keep from thinking about him. But she failed. Every corner of the city reminded her of Alexander, the tall man in the tailored suits who shouldn't have stepped into her world, yet did. The man who saw her when everyone else overlooked her. And now she had pushed him away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. For a brief, desperate second, she hoped it was him. But when she checked, her chest sank. A message from Vanessa Cole. "Good choice, darling. Keep your distance. For both your sakes." Sophia's hands trembled as she shoved the phone back into her bag. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced them down. She couldn't let herself break. Not here, not now. Alexander's patience, however, had already snapped. He stormed into his office Monday morning, his assistant trailing nervously behind him. "Sir, your meeting with the board is at 9. "Cancel it," Alexander cut in, his voice like steel. The assistant blinked. "Cancel? But cancel." Without waiting for an answer, Alexander grabbed his coat and walked out. He wasn't going to sit in another pointless meeting while Sophia slipped further out of his life. He needed answers. And he knew exactly where to start. Vanessa Cole was lounging in her office, scrolling idly through her phone when Alexander barged in without knocking. Her painted lips curved into a smile. "Alexander, to what do I owe the pleasure?" He slammed a photograph onto her desk, the one she had shown him last week. "Sophia with Eric. Where did you get this?" His voice was low, dangerous. Vanessa arched an elegant brow. "A reliable source." "Name?" She chuckled, swirling the wine in her glass. "Why so serious? You don't honestly believe she's innocent, do you? Look at her, meeting men in the dark, passing envelopes." "Don't," Alexander snapped, his eyes blazing. "Don't you dare talk about her like that." For the first time, Vanessa's confident smile faltered. Alexander leaned closer, his voice a growl. "I did my own digging. That man, Eric Willis. He's drowning in gambling debt, yes. But Sophia has no ties to him, except that she lent him money to keep him from being beaten to death by loan sharks." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "And you believe that?" "I don't believe it. I know it. I had him followed. And guess what? He hasn't seen her since that night. No secret meetings. No money laundering. Nothing." Her face hardened, but Alexander pressed on, his voice sharp as glass. "You planted this. You've been feeding me poison, trying to make me doubt her." Vanessa set down her glass, her tone cooling into something sharper. "Alexander, listen to me. I've watched men like you fall for women like her 100 times. They're parasites. They cling, they bleed you dry, and when you're empty, they disappear. I'm trying to save you. Save me." He let out a bitter laugh. "No, Vanessa. You're trying to control me. And I won't let you." Her nostrils flared, anger flashing in her eyes, but Alexander was already turning away. "Stay away from her," he warned. "If I find out you've spoken to her again, if you so much as look at her, I'll destroy everything you've built." And with that, he walked out, leaving Vanessa trembling with fury. That night, Sophia sat alone at her kitchen table, staring at the bills spread before her. Rent was due. Utilities overdue. She'd given Eric the last of her savings, and now she was barely scraping by. She pressed her palms to her eyes, fighting the sob that rose in her throat. She had thought letting Alexander go would protect him, but all it had done was leave her drowning. A knock at the door startled her. She quickly wiped her face and opened it, only to freeze. Alexander stood there, rain dripping from his hair, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Hey, Alexander!" Before she could say more, he stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "We need to talk." His voice was firm, but beneath it was an ache she recognized all too well. Sophia's hands trembled. "You shouldn't be here. I don't care." She turned away, her chest tightening. "You don't understand." "No," he interrupted, moving closer. "You don't understand. I know about Eric. I know why you helped him. And I know Vanessa's been twisting everything to make us doubt each other." Sophia froze. Slowly, she turned back, her wide eyes shimmering with tears. You know. I do." His gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. "And I'm furious, not at you, at her, at myself, for letting her get between us." Sophia's lips trembled. "But," she said you'd believe her, that you'd see me as nothing but." "Enough," Alexander said sharply, then gentled his tone. He stepped closer, cupping her cheek with a trembling hand. "I don't care what she said. I don't care what anyone says. I know who you are, Sophia, and I'm not letting you push me away again." Her tears finally spilled over, and she choked on a sob. "Alexander, I thought I was protecting you. I thought I wasn't good enough." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he'd never let go. "You're more than enough. You're everything." For the first time in weeks, Sophia let herself collapse against him, her walls shattering. And for the first time, Alexander felt whole again. But neither of them noticed the shadow watching from the street below. Vanessa, drenched in rain, her eyes cold with fury. She had lost the first battle. But the war was far from over. The night was thick with storm clouds when Alexander Reed finally decided he'd had enough. For weeks, Vanessa Cole had played her games, pulling strings, whispering lies, trying to sever the fragile bond between him and Sophia. She had almost succeeded once. But no more. Alexander had been known in the business world as a man who never lost. And now, for the first time, his war wasn't about numbers or contracts. It was about protecting the woman he loved. Sophia, on the other hand, stood at the small window of her apartment, heart hammering. She had barely slept since Alexander had confronted Vanessa. Each night felt like living under a shadow, knowing Vanessa wasn't finished. She was right. That evening, her phone buzzed with a message. "Meet me at the glass tower rooftop. Midnight. If you care about Alexander, you'll come alone." Her blood ran cold. She knew immediately who it was. Vanessa. Her first instinct was to delete the message, to pretend she never saw it. But fear gripped her chest. If Vanessa truly meant to hurt Alexander, if this was her last card, could she ignore it? With trembling hands, she grabbed her coat. The glass tower loomed over the city, its rooftop shrouded in mist and neon light. Sophia stepped out of the stairwell and into the biting wind. Vanessa was already there, her black coat whipping dramatically in the air, her lips curved into a predatory smile. "Ah, the little waitress." Vanessa's voice was smooth as silk, sharp as venom. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Sophia swallowed hard, but forced herself to stand tall. "What do you want, Vanessa?" "I want you gone," Vanessa said simply. "Permanently." Sophia's heart pounded. "Why? What do I matter to you?" Vanessa's eyes flashed, her composure cracking. "Because you're in my way. I have built my empire brick by brick, clawed my way to the top. And then you, a nobody, waltz into Alexander's life and make him question everything." Her voice dripped with disdain. "Do you know how many years I've stood beside him? Waiting, planning, and now he chooses you." Sophia's lips trembled, but she found her courage. "Because he loves me. Not your power. Not your money. Me." Vanessa's smile faltered into something darker. From her coat, she pulled a small envelope and tossed it at Sophia's feet. Inside were photographs, Sophia's workplace, her apartment, even shots of her walking home at night. Sophia's blood ran cold. "You've been following me." "Oh, darling," Vanessa purred. "I've been watching. And if you don't disappear tonight, I'll make sure your life becomes unlivable. Every employer will know your name. Every landlord will refuse you. You'll be nothing but a stain on the sidewalk." Sophia's knees shook. But before she could respond, a voice cut through the wind. "Touch her, and you'll regret it." Both women spun around. Alexander emerged from the shadows of the rooftop entrance, his tall frame rigid, his eyes burning with controlled fury. "Alexander," Sophia gasped. "I told you not to come alone," he said, his voice both tender and reprimanding. "Did you really think I'd let you walk into a trap?" Vanessa's face twisted. "You followed her?" "Of course I did," Alexander said, stepping protectively in front of Sophia. "Because I know you. You don't fight fair." Vanessa's mask finally shattered. Her voice rose with raw desperation. "She doesn't deserve you. She'll drag you down, Alexander. Everything you've built, she'll ruin it." Alexander's gaze was steady, his voice like iron. "You're wrong. She's the only thing in my life that isn't built on lies and power plays. She's the only real thing I've ever had." Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Vanessa trembled, her fury boiling over. "Then you're a fool." She lunged forward, but Alexander was faster. He caught her wrist mid-swing, his grip unyielding. "Don't." His voice was deadly calm. "Don't make this worse than it already is." Vanessa's chest heaved, her eyes wild. For a moment, the rooftop was silent but for the sound of the wind. Then, with a guttural cry, she wrenched free and stumbled back, her mask of elegance crumbling into something pitiful. "You'll regret this," she hissed, before storming toward the exit. Alexander didn't stop her. He simply wrapped an arm around Sophia, pulling her close as Vanessa's footsteps disappeared into the night. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophia clung to him, her body trembling. "You shouldn't have come," Alexander murmured into her hair. "I had to," she whispered, voice breaking. "I couldn't let her hurt you." He pulled back just enough to look into her tear-streaked face. "And I couldn't let her hurt you. Don't you see, Sophia? We're stronger together. No more running. No more hiding." Her lips quivered. "But what if she comes back? What if?" He silenced her with a soft but firm kiss, pouring every ounce of his certainty into it. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against hers. "Let her try," he said, his voice low and steady. "Because as long as I have you, she'll never win." Weeks later, Vanessa's empire crumbled. The board discovered discrepancies in her accounts, fraudulent transfers, manipulations buried deep in her files. Alexander hadn't lifted a finger. Vanessa had undone herself. Stripped of her power, she vanished from the city like a ghost. And for Alexander and Sophia, life began anew. It wasn't easy. They still had battles, Sophia's insecurities, Alexander's fierce protectiveness, the whispers of a world that didn't understand their love. But for the first time, they faced them together. One quiet evening, Alexander invited Sophia to his penthouse rooftop garden, a place few had ever seen. String lights twinkled overhead, and the city stretched out like a sea of stars. Sophia gasped softly. "It's beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Alexander murmured, guiding her to the center. Before she could respond, he dropped to one knee. Her breath caught. "From the moment I met you, you turned my world upside down," he said, his voice raw and unguarded. "You taught me what it means to love, to fight for something real. I don't want to spend another day without you by my side." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside was a ring, simple but elegant, gleaming under the lights. Sophia's hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling over. "Marry me, Sophia." His voice broke slightly. "Be the reason I never lose myself again." For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Then, with a sob, she nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." Alexander rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before sweeping her into his arms. Their kiss tasted of tears and laughter, of endings and new beginnings. For the first time in a long time, both of them felt free. The storm had passed, and all that remained was love. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Until we meet again in the next story, take care and keep the magic of imagination alive.